The first error most people fall into is assuming disrespect starts with someone else's attitude. It doesn't. Disrespect starts the instant people realize your standards can be bargained with. Long before anyone cuts you off, dismisses your opinion, or treats you as if you don't matter. They've already been watching you. Human beings are constantly picking up on quiet cues. They notice what you put up with, what you forgive, what you excuse, and how badly you crave approval. The unsettling truth is this: people rarely disrespect confidence first. They disrespect what they've been allowed to get away with, and that permission is often granted without a single word ever being said. Robert Greene keeps circling back to one idea throughout his writing: power grows out of perception. Before people test your authority, they gauge your sense of self-worth. If they pick up on the fact that your confidence hinges on their approval, they know they've got leverage over you. But when they run into someone who values themselves no matter what outsiders think, the whole psychological dynamic shifts. Suddenly, disrespecting that person becomes risky because they no longer control what happens next. This is why self-respect isn't merely a personal virtue, it's a strategic tool. It quietly signals that crossing your boundaries carries a price. Not a price rooted in anger or payback, but one rooted in your willingness to step away, pull back your attention, or remove yourself entirely. People dread losing access to someone who won't tolerate disrespect far more than they fear loud shows of aggression. Take a close look at the people who naturally earn respect wherever they go. They aren't constantly trying to prove something. They aren't chasing recognition. They don't cut into conversations just to be noticed. In fact, they often say less than anyone else in the room. Yet when they do speak, people pay attention. Why? Because their conduct sends one clear message: my worth isn't tied to your opinion. That quiet certainty puts others under psychological pressure. People grow cautious because they sense this person can't be swayed through approval, guilt, or intimidation. Now compare that to someone who's constantly seeking acceptance. They laugh along at jokes made at their expense. They apologize for things that don't need an apology. They flip their opinions just to dodge conflict. They overlook repeated disrespect because they're afraid of losing relationships. At first, others might value their kindness, but over time, that appreciation slides into familiarity. Familiarity slides into entitlement, and entitlement eventually turns into disrespect. Human nature rarely safeguards what comes without limits. The hard truth is that every time you let someone cross a line without pushing back, you shift that line further out. People learn from patterns, not promises. If your actions keep telling them your boundaries can bend, they stop treating those boundaries as genuine. Soon they start testing you in bigger ways. Not necessarily because they dislike you, but because they've figured out there's no real cost to doing so. This is where people make yet another mistake. They think respect comes from being agreeable. But history, leadership, and psychology all point somewhere else. People like kindness, but they respect standards. Someone without standards might be well liked for a moment, but they're rarely taken seriously. The person who calmly guards their dignity, even when it's uncomfortable, becomes memorable. They build a reputation that precedes them. Others start hesitating before crossing someone who's already proven they won't trade their self-respect for fleeting approval. Notice that genuine self-respect never needs to announce itself. It doesn't rely on threats, emotional blow-ups, or constant reminders of status. Those behaviors usually give away insecurity. Real confidence stays quiet because it has nothing left to prove. It knows that walking away from disrespect often carries more weight than winning an argument. Silence, distance, and consistency become forms of strength that people struggle to challenge. The paradox is straightforward. The less desperately you chase respect, the more naturally it comes to you. The moment people grasp that your identity isn't for sale, your principles can't be negotiated, and your dignity can't be bought with attention or approval, they start treating you differently. Not because you demanded it, but because they understand disrespecting you will cost them access to someone who knows their own value. And once that unshakable foundation is set, the next step is learning to make every word carry enough weight that people think twice before crossing you again. Once you've built unshakable self-respect, the next challenge is making sure people notice it without you ever having to say so. This is where most people stumble. They assume authority comes from talking more, explaining every choice, or winning every argument. But in truth, the more desperately you want to be understood, the weaker you appear. Every unneeded explanation reveals something deeper. It suggests you need other people's permission to feel justified. And the second people sense that need, they realize they've got influence over you. Powerful people grasp a principle most others miss. Words hold value only when they're rare. The person who talks nonstop hands everyone access to their thoughts, emotions, and intentions. Nothing stays mysterious. Nothing stays uncertain. And once people fully understand you, they also learn how to predict you. Predictable people are easy to manipulate. They know exactly which buttons to push, which criticisms will rattle you, and which compliments will win you over. Robert Greene often stresses that mystery builds power. The less people know about your inner world, the more carefully they have to approach you. Human beings naturally fear what they can't fully anticipate. This is why the quiet person in the room often draws more attention than the loudest one. While everyone else competes to be heard, the silent observer is gathering intel. They're studying personalities, weaknesses, ambitions, and emotions as they unfold without ever showing their own hand. In every social interaction, information equals power. Whoever reveals less usually holds more. Think about someone who feels compelled to defend themselves every time they're criticized. Before the other person even finishes talking, they're already explaining their intentions, listing excuses, trying to prove they were misread. Their words might be logical, but psychologically, they signal insecurity. They're telling others, "Your opinion matters enough to me that I have to win you over." Now compare that to someone who listens calmly, responds only when needed, and doesn't feel obligated to justify every choice. Their silence breeds uncertainty. Others start second-guessing themselves instead. They wonder whether their criticism landed at all. That uncertainty quietly tips the balance of power. This doesn't mean turning cold or refusing to talk. It means being deliberate. Every sentence should serve a purpose. Every opinion should add something of value. People naturally respect those whose words carry weight because they know those words are never wasted. Picture two leaders walking into a meeting. One dominates every exchange, cuts people off constantly, and talks just to fill silence. The other listens closely, lets everyone else share their thinking first, then offers a few precise observations. Which one leaves the stronger impression? More often than not, it's the second. Their restraint builds authority because people instinctively link control over speech with control over emotion. Silence also shields you from one of the biggest risks in human interaction, exposing your weaknesses too soon. Every unnecessary complaint, emotional reaction, or impulsive confession hands others information they might eventually turn against you. Not everyone means harm, but human nature holds on to vulnerability. In moments of competition, conflict, or disagreement, people often grab whatever knowledge gives them an edge. The less fuel you hand them, the harder you become to challenge. There's another psychological effect silence produces. It forces others to fill the empty space. Most people can't stand silence, so they start talking. They give away secrets, opinions, fears, and motives without even realizing it. While they expose themselves, you stay composed, gathering valuable insight. Over time, this habit lets you understand people far better than they understand you. That imbalance of knowledge naturally earns respect. Remember, saying less doesn't mean thinking less. It means swapping impulsive reactions for deliberate responses. It means choosing influence over attention, strategy over emotion, and presence over noise. When every word you say is measured, people stop listening for quantity and start listening for meaning. Eventually, they realize that if you've chosen to speak, it's probably worth hearing. And once your words start carrying that kind of weight, The next step is making your boundaries impossible for anyone to overlook. Speaking less gives your words worth, but words by themselves are never enough. If people find out your limits only exist in conversation and not in practice, they'll eventually stop taking your words or your silence seriously. This is why boundaries are the real test of authority. They separate people who simply ask for respect from those who naturally command it. Every boundary you set sends a signal, but every boundary you fail to enforce sends an even louder one. Human nature pays attention to actions, not statements. If your behavior contradicts your standards, people will always trust your behavior over your words. One of the biggest illusions is thinking disrespect happens all at once. It rarely does. It usually starts small. A sarcastic comment that goes unchallenged. A promise broken more than once. Someone who keeps interrupting you. A friend who only reaches out when they need something. A coworker who takes credit for your work. These moments might seem trivial, but psychology runs on patterns. When people cross a small line without facing any pushback, they get curious about where the next line sits. Every successful test invites another. Over time, what started as a minor act of disrespect turns into a habit because without meaning to, you taught them your boundaries were negotiable. Robert Greene frequently explores how power builds through consistency. People quickly figure out who can be pressured and who can't. They watch to see whether your principles shift depending on who's in front of you. If you only hold firm when it's convenient, your boundaries lose their credibility. But when your standards stay the same regardless of status, popularity, or circumstance, people start adjusting their behavior before they even interact with you. Your reputation begins doing the work your words no longer have to. Many people avoid setting boundaries because they're afraid others will dislike them. But that fear creates an even bigger problem. Wanting to be liked often turns into an invitation to be used. The more you prioritize keeping everyone else comfortable, the more uncomfortable your own life becomes. Eventually, you end up surrounded by people who respect your usefulness but not your worth. They value what you do for them, yet they never think twice about crossing your limits because they've learned your need for approval outweighs your commitment to yourself. The strongest boundaries aren't emotional. They're calm, predictable, and steady. Picture someone repeatedly speaking to you with disrespect. The average person reacts with anger, argues, and makes threats they never follow through on. The powerful person handles it differently. They stay composed. They don't raise their voice or seek payback. Instead, they quietly adjust their behavior. They limit access. They stop giving unnecessary attention. If the disrespect keeps up, they step away entirely. This response carries far more psychological weight because it proves your standards are real. There's no drama, only consequences. People often mistake this for coldness, but it's actually a form of self-respect. You're not punishing anyone. You're protecting your own dignity. There's an important distinction there. Punishment comes from emotion. Boundaries come from principle. The moment people realize your choices are guided by principle rather than passing feelings, they start taking every interaction with you more seriously. Boundaries earn respect for another reason too. They remove uncertainty. People know exactly where they stand with you. They understand honesty gets rewarded, manipulation gets ignored, and repeated disrespect leads to distance. This consistency builds trust even among people who disagree with you. Ironically, people often respect someone with firm boundaries more than someone who tries to please everybody. Why? Because predictable strength feels safer than unpredictable weakness. There's also a hidden psychological effect at play. When someone loses access to your time, your attention, or your presence because they crossed a line, they start linking disrespect with loss. That lesson lands far harder than any lecture or argument. Human beings remember consequences much longer than they remember conversations. Once that connection forms, they naturally grow more careful in future dealings with you. Never forget that every relationship teaches people how to treat you. Every compromise, every reaction, every decision becomes part of that lesson. If your boundaries crumble under pressure, your authority crumbles with them. But if your standards hold firm, even when tested, people eventually realize disrespecting you simply isn't worth the price. And once your boundaries become impossible to overlook, the next level of power comes from mastering your emotions when others try to provoke you. By now, you've built self-respect, learned to speak with intention, and set boundaries people can no longer ignore. But there's one final test that reveals whether all that power is real or just an illusion. It shows up in moments when someone deliberately tries to provoke you. They criticize you publicly. They question your authority. They insult you, hoping to drag you into an emotional reaction. In that moment, your biggest enemy isn't the person in front of you. It's your own emotions. Whoever controls your emotions controls you. And the instant someone can predict your reactions, they can start manipulating your behavior. This is one of the oldest rules of power. People often think strength means dominating others, but real strength means dominating yourself. Robert Greene repeatedly notes that emotional reactions cloud judgment. Anger, frustration, and wounded pride create blind spots that sharp opponents can easily exploit. The person who stays calm while everyone else loses control quietly gains the upper hand, because they keep thinking while everyone else is just reacting. Consider how easily people can expose your weaknesses once they know exactly what sets you off. If a single insult can knock you off balance, they've found your weak point. They no longer need intelligence or strategy. They just need to hit the same trigger whenever they want to throw you off. Every emotional outburst becomes proof that your behavior can be steered from the outside instead of directed from within. This is why truly powerful people rarely react on the spot. They know every emotional response gives away useful information. Anger reveals your insecurities. Defensiveness reveals your fears. Desperation reveals your dependence on approval. Even excessive excitement can reveal your intentions before the right moment. The calmer you stay, the less you give away. Silence protects your strategy, while emotional reactions expose it. Picture two people facing the exact same insult. The first argues instantly, raises their voice, and spends the next few minutes trying to prove the other person wrong. Onlookers might remember the argument, but they also remember who lost control. The second person listens without interrupting, pauses, and either responds with a few calm words or chooses not to respond at all. That silence creates discomfort. Suddenly, attention shifts away from the insult and toward the person who wouldn't be rattled. Instead of looking weak, they seem impossible to manipulate. This doesn't mean bottling up emotions or pretending they don't exist. Every human feels anger, disappointment, and frustration. The difference lies in what happens between feeling something and acting on it. Powerful people create a gap between the two. They let emotions settle before making decisions. That brief pause often prevents mistakes that emotional people spend years cleaning up. There's another psychological reason emotional control earns respect. Most people expect predictable reactions. They expect anger after an insult, panic under pressure, or fear when challenged. When you refuse to react the way they expect, you introduce uncertainty. Uncertainty makes people cautious. They start wondering what you're thinking, what you'll do next, and whether provoking you was actually a mistake. That uncertainty alone can discourage future disrespect, because people hesitate to challenge someone they can't read emotionally. History repeatedly shows that great leaders, skilled negotiators, and influential people all share this trait. They don't let temporary emotions drive permanent decisions. They understand that every emotional explosion gives away power that may never come back. Staying composed isn't passive. It's strategic. It lets you choose your response instead of letting someone else choose it for you. Maybe the biggest advantage of emotional discipline is that it protects your reputation. People eventually forget arguments, but they rarely forget composure. Over time, they start associating you with stability, confidence, and self-control. They realize intimidation, insults, and manipulation just don't work on you. Once that reputation takes hold, Many conflicts end before they even start because people instinctively look for easier targets. In the end, people don't fear the loudest person in the room. They fear the one who can't be emotionally controlled. When others realize they can't provoke you into a mistake, they lose one of their most powerful weapons. And once your emotions are fully under your control, the next step is becoming so valuable that people fear losing your presence more than they value disrespecting you. Once you become emotionally unshakable, you reach a point where arguments stop defining your power. But there's another level that makes people think twice before ever disrespecting you. It's not your words, it's not your temper, it's your value. Human nature runs on a simple rule. People protect what they're afraid of losing. If your presence is common, your attention is unlimited, and your time is available to anyone at any moment, people gradually start taking you for granted. Familiarity without value breeds indifference, and indifference is often where disrespect begins. This is why powerful people never make themselves endlessly available. They understand attention is one of the most valuable resources they have. Every minute you give away carelessly tells people your time doesn't mean much. Robert Greene frequently shows that scarcity boosts perceived value. Throughout history, what's rare has always been prized more than what's ordinary. The same rule applies to human behavior. The person who's always around often gets overlooked, while the person whose presence has to be earned naturally commands more respect. Many people wrongly believe being constantly available makes them more important. They reply to every message instantly, drop their own priorities for others, and stay reachable no matter how they're treated. At first, this might look generous, but over time, people start expecting it instead of appreciating it. What was once seen as kindness becomes an obligation the moment you fail to meet that expectation. The same people who benefited from your availability might grow frustrated, not because you did anything wrong, but because they'd gotten used to unlimited access. Look at the people who hold real influence anywhere. They're not hard to reach because they're arrogant. They're selective because they understand the value of focus. Their attention goes where it matters most. They guard their energy against unnecessary distractions. This selectiveness creates an invisible psychological effect. Others start valuing every interaction because they know it isn't freely handed out. Respect grows when access has to be earned instead of assumed. But becoming valuable is about far more than just limiting your availability. The biggest source of value is ongoing personal growth. Skills, knowledge, discipline, confidence, and reliability are assets that aren't easy to replace. When you keep improving yourself, you become harder and harder to ignore. People might disrespect empty titles or short-lived success, but they hesitate to disrespect real competence. Deep down, they know someone who consistently creates value has options, and people with options are never easy to control. This is why chasing attention is such a risky habit. Attention can be given today and taken away tomorrow. Real value works differently. It exists whether or not people recognize it. If your confidence depends on applause, compliments, or social approval, your power vanishes the moment those things disappear. But when your confidence comes from your abilities and your character, outside opinions lose their power to define you. Others sense that independence, and it changes how they engage with you right away. Another powerful lesson is learning to walk away from situations that no longer respect your value. Many people stay stuck in unhealthy friendships, jobs, or relationships simply because they're afraid of being alone. That fear weakens their position. When others sense you believe you have nowhere else to go, they know you're unlikely to leave no matter how you're treated. But the moment they realize you're fully willing to walk away rather than accept disrespect, the balance of power shifts dramatically. Suddenly, they're the ones worried about losing something valuable. Notice none of this requires manipulation or arrogance. It's not about pretending to be unavailable or acting superior. It's about building a life meaningful enough that you're no longer desperate for anyone's validation. Your purpose, your discipline, and your standards become more important than fleeting approval. Ironically, the less desperately you chase people's attention, the more attention they willingly give you. The most respected people are rarely the ones demanding importance. They're the ones whose absence gets noticed the moment they leave. Their value speaks before they ever do, and their presence is appreciated because it's never wasted. When people realize they could lose access to someone who genuinely enriches their lives, disrespect becomes a risk they're no longer willing to take. And after building that kind of value, the final step is making sure your actions create a reputation strong enough that people think twice before ever testing your character. By this point, you've learned respect starts with yourself, grows through disciplined speech, gets protected by firm boundaries, gets strengthened by emotional control, and gets reinforced by becoming genuinely valuable. But none of these principles matter if they stay ideas instead of becoming habits. In the end, people don't judge you by what you claim to believe. They judge you by what you consistently do. Your reputation isn't built by your intentions. It's built by your actions. And once a reputation is set, it starts speaking for you before you even walk into the room. Robert Greene often explores one timeless truth about power. People trust patterns more than promises. Anyone can claim to be confident. Anyone can say they deserve respect. Anyone can talk about loyalty, discipline, or strength. But words fall apart the moment reality contradicts them. If someone repeatedly watches you cave on your standards under pressure, your reputation shifts. If they consistently see you sticking to your principles, even when it costs you something, your reputation shifts in a completely different direction. Over time, people stop questioning who you are because your actions have already answered that question. This is why consistency is one of the most underrated forms of power. Most people are predictable only in how inconsistent they are. They're confident when things are going smoothly, but insecure when challenged. They enforce boundaries with some people while letting others slide. They talk about discipline while repeatedly breaking promises to themselves. That inconsistency breeds doubt. And wherever doubt exists, respect starts to fade. People naturally test individuals whose behavior shifts based on convenience because they sense uncertainty underneath. Now picture someone who behaves differently. Their standards stay the same no matter who they're talking to. They're respectful without being submissive. They're calm without being passive. They're confident without seeking attention. They keep their word even when no one's watching. Day after day, their actions reinforce the same message. Eventually, something remarkable happens. People stop testing them because experience has already taught them what the outcome will be. Their reputation becomes a quiet warning that disrespect will never pay off. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to protect their image instead of building their character. An image depends on what people think today. Character shapes what they'll think tomorrow. You can spend years carefully managing appearances, but a single moment of weak character can shatter that illusion. Real influence gets built differently. It comes from making hundreds of small choices that line up with your values until those choices become your identity. At that point, respect stops being something you ask for. It becomes something people naturally connect with your name. There's also a powerful psychological principle behind reputation. Human beings lean on past experience to predict future behavior. If someone has consistently shown confidence, discipline, and integrity, people expect those traits to keep going. They hesitate before treating them disrespectfully because past interactions have already taught them there will be consequences. Not dramatic consequences fueled by anger, but calm, predictable consequences fueled by principle. That expectation shapes behavior before conflict even starts. This is why the strongest people rarely need to defend themselves. Their reputation does it for them. Others have already seen how they respond under pressure. They've watched them walk away from manipulation, refuse to put up with disrespect, and stay composed in tough situations. Those memories become part of who they are in other people's minds. Over time, people start treating them with far greater care.